Hello, everyone. It is Chris, as you can see. I am here in sunny Miami. And again, I apologize for not being able to be in class this week. This was not my preference. Unfortunately, my full time job called me out into the field for a couple of things, so I needed to come down here. But the show must go on. So this week, you're going to be completing a couple of different things in anticipation of your final draft of your informative essay. So, what we're going to focus on this week, last week's assignment focused on your intro and your conclusion, and the need for kind of creating that bookend structure. Your intro to establish the main ideas, and your thesis, obviously, as we've discussed, and then your conclusion to kind of reflect that, although it's not an exact, copy of your introduction. Obviously, the conclusion is just to reiterate the main ideas, and then to provide some closure for the reader, right? So I have a tendency to look at my own face and not look into the camera. Uh, so I'm gonna hold my coffee cup in front of my face so I can't look at myself. What you're gonna be doing this week then is kind of building on that. So like I said, we're gonna work on this in stages. So with your intro and conclusion finished by tonight's class, as they should be based on last week's assignment. What you're going to want to do this week, what we're going to focus on, is the body of the essay, which I'm sure comes as no great surprise. And so the body of the essay, as we've talked about before, really, this is going to vary a lot in terms of what it consists of, based on whatever it is that you are writing about for your topic. So, as we've discussed, that 5-paragraph essay structure that we've talked about with, intro, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, conclusion. Obviously, that structure isn't going to quite hold here because the paper is going to be a little bit longer than that. As we discussed, it should be 4 to 6 pages, double spaced. But the same principle applies. So you're still looking at an introduction, which should just be a paragraph. You always want your intro to be about a paragraph, as we've talked about, with your thesis at the end. And then the body really is going to vary depending on the points that you're going to be discussing. So, maybe if it's just a historical piece, maybe you're just writing about the history of something, whatever it is, a place, a person, a law, anything like that. You still want to think about the structure of your essay in terms of those 3 points of discussion. If I'm talking about a person's life, what are 3 things I'm going to focus on in terms of talking about their life to kind of provide the reader with a roadmap and to give myself some structure as the writer, right? All things that we've talked about in previous weeks, but just kind of re-clarifying the importance of those issues. If you don't have a game plan for writing about whatever it is you're going to write about, it's going to wander, right? And you don't want that. So you want to consider, along with your, as we did with the outline before, you want to consider, what your essay really is going to consist of and what you want it to consist of. What is it you want to convey to the reader? What information do you want to give them, right? And so that's the idea here. So the body of your essay is this week's assignment. So finishing up a draft, obviously, of the body of your essay, and then combining that with your intro and conclusion and having a fully formed draft. Now, you need to have a full draft by next week's class, by week 9, okay? And again, I say draft, it just needs to be a completed version of the paper. It doesn't obviously need to be the final version. I don't even necessarily expect that you will have fully edited it yet, that sort of a thing. You may be missing citations, that's okay. The idea is that by next week, though, in class, you will have a full draft, okay? So I'll be looking at your intros and conclusions over the course of the next few days and returning them back to you with feedback so you have some idea of kind of where you're headed as you compose the body. And the body, the full essay draft, the body that you're writing this week, along with the intro and conclusion that you've already drafted, will be due by class time next week. And the reason for that is that in class next week, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to be peer reviewing each other's work. So we're going to be reading each other's papers, offering some insights as readers, talking about kind of how, as a reader, we interpreted what you were presenting, if there were any gray areas, if you were missing, citations, if the sentence construction was off here. All of those things we're going to look at kind of together in a peer review situation. In addition to that, I'm going to sit down with each of you individually, separately from the class, during class time next week, but in class. You and I, each of you and I will sit down and we'll go over your draft and kind of talk about, where you are with it, what I think the strengths are, what I think the areas are that you need to improve on a little bit, the types of revisions I think it would be a good idea to make for your final draft, that sort of a thing. Reason being, the next week is our last week, and that's when your final essay will be due. And so I like to, in lieu of giving, I thought about giving an extra week in there for a rough draft, but I thought that it might make more sense to approach this in stages. I can return these things to you, the individual pieces, the intro and the conclusion and all that, with feedback. But I think sitting down and kind of going over your paper piece by piece next week really will be more beneficial than having you write a rough draft, because I think it gives you the opportunity to see, all right, I took all these individual pieces, my intro, my conclusion, my research, the body of the essay, all that. I turn it into a draft. What's left, right? And the what's left, I think, is what tends to throw people off a little bit. So for next week, complete a draft of your essay based on the feedback that, like I said, I'll give you in the next couple of days on your intros and conclusions. If you do not have your intros and conclusions turned in from last week yet, you need to have those turned in by class time tonight, okay? So I need your intro and your conclusion. It's in the announcement that I posted last week with regard to what's due tonight by class time. And then once those things are submitted, probably later tonight or tomorrow morning, I will take a look at your intros and conclusions, return them to you, with feedback, with some insights in terms of what I think works, what I think maybe needs some work, that sort of a thing. And then based on that, you can complete the body of the essay and have a full essay draft for class next week. So with that in mind, that's what you're going to be working on this week. The other piece that you're going to be working on this week will be there'll be another discussion, which you'll see posted. It'll be under week 8 discussion, and I understand there may have been some confusion with regard to the week 7 discussion. Apparently, it was showing up in some cases and not in all cases. So I will look into that and give you an extra week for that. So if the week 7 discussion, if last week's discussion when I was gone that I posted, that I mentioned in the announcements, if that wasn't visible to you for some reason, or if you couldn't access it or something like that, that's fine. You can have an extra week on that, and I'll make sure that's active this week as well. So a couple things due for next week: full draft of your essay, which basically at this point just means building out the body of the essay, right? The body paragraphs. And then the discussion from last week if you didn't complete it. And then this week there will be an additional discussion. And then when we meet next week, we'll get immediately into the peer review, swapping papers, kind of looking for some specific things in the peer review. Kind of in anticipation of that, I know peer reviews kind of freak people out a little bit, and I know a lot of people think, I'm not really qualified to read my classmates' work. But what you want to remember about a peer review situation is that it's not about you as an editor, it's about you as a writer. Or I'm sorry, as a reader. You're looking at someone's writing from the perspective of a reader. And as a reader, what needs work. So that's kind of how we're going to approach it next week when we do our peer review. And then we'll have our one-on-one conferences. We can talk about your drafts, any concerns you have, anything you want to talk about regarding that. So with that in mind, complete rough draft of your essay and the discussions from last week, if you didn't complete it, and the discussion from this week will be for next week's class. So I will see you next week. I will not be gone next week for the next couple of weeks for our last meetings. Have a great week, and if you have any questions or anything like that, as usual, please feel free to let me know.